My story took place in Colmar, France. It's a town near Germany. My grandparents were quite young during World War II and told me many stories about that town. When I was 4, my parents and my mother's parents bought a 2-story house in Colmar with a beautiful garden. My grandparents lived on the first floor, and my parents and me on the second floor. There was a basement, which was separated in 3 rooms, a storage room, a room for my father, and a laundry room, an attic, and next to the attic, a small storage room at the time. I loved the basement. I always played there or in the garden. I never was afraid of the basement, but the attic terrified me. I remember I was 4 and my mother put some boxes in the attic. I followed her and felt very uneasy. It was dark and I felt eyes on me. I looked in every direction, but I never saw anything. I was little and I thought that there was a beast up there. Not a monster, a beast. I don't know why. Fast forward. I'm 8 years old. In the summer of 1991, I played every Saturday with a friend, Melanie. I had this genius idea of searching the house to find a secret passage. I had read a book about a girl finding a secret passage in her house, and I was sure there was one, because my house was quite old. We searched the basement, but found nothing, so we eventually went to the attic. It was such a strange place. It was L-shaped, but the left part of that place was totally dark, so we had to bring a flashlight. What I could never explain was a hole in the wall at the right corner of the attic. It was 3 feet tall and quite narrow, but by looking into it with the flashlight, one could see a room, but there was no entry, just this hole. Nobody could enter in. This room was actually behind a small storage room next to the attic. Maybe there was a passageway, but we never found any. So we were looking through this hole when I felt uneasy again. I felt something in the attic with us. I kept looking at the far end where there was no light and was sure that something would come at us. I saw nothing and we went out playing in the garden. We went back to the attic. We were fearless young girls. My friend never felt anything, so I thought that I had an overactive imagination. So this time, I was looking through the hole, and my friend had the flashlight. She was standing at the far end of the attic, and suddenly, she asked me, "What's that?" I looked in the beam of the flashlight and froze. There was a young man sitting on the floor, his knees against his chest. His arms were crossed on his knees, like he was hugging himself. He turned his head towards us and smiled. We bolted out of the room and went to the storage room. My heart was pounding. I was out of breath. I first thought that it was a real live person, but he had no color. It was like a 3D dark shadow, and we never heard any footsteps. My friend refused to admit that we saw a ghost, and we never talked about it. I never saw him again, but the storage room became my room when I was a teen, and sometimes I heard strange noises. Bangings on the wall which was connected to the secret room, and scratching noises. My grandmother learned later that our house was a clandestine printing office for World War II. The owners printed slogans against the Germans, but I think there was something else in that house. I believe that the secret room was used to hide people. But forever and ever, I'm terrified of the attic. We moved out 3 years ago, but I still have nightmares. Man in a trench coat staring at me. After being considerably bored at work one day, I decided to Google ghost stories, as I've personally seen and dealt with them before, and came across this site. I love reading the stories, and it got me all jazzed up to tell mine. It probably all started when I was 14. I'm now 24. My family and I were on a week-long camping trip when my dog passed away. This dog that we had, Max was his name, was the family dog, but being at a young age when we got him, I became the closest to him. After I had learned that he died, I was so upset that my family had to cut the vacation short just to get me home. I had just moved into a room in my parents' basement, and it had no door to it. Now, where my bed was located, when looking out the door, you could see the furnace to the house. One night, I woke up and grabbed a sip of water from a water bottle I always keep beside my bed, and happened to look towards the entrance of my room. Sitting in the doorway was my dog Max. Now, since this happened so long ago, I've constantly said to myself that this was a dream only because when I started calling Max to me, I remember specifically his eyes glowing red and him then jumping on my bed and trying to attack me. That ended up scaring the bejesus out of me. After the whole dog dream, I've not seen Max since. Later, when I would wake up and roll over, I would steal a look to the door, and I would see a giant man, like a silhouette, standing in my doorframe staring at me. To me, it looked like he was wearing a huge trench coat with some sort of hat with a huge brim. The first time this happened, I was so frightened that I dared not to stare at him too long, as he would attack me like my dog. It became constant. Like every night, I would see him, and for the first while, it scared me to no ends, but I became used to it, and later, when I would see him, I would just roll over, smile, and go back to sleep. One morning, after seeing the dude in my doorway the night before, I was speaking with my parents about a bad dream I had the night before. My mom chuckled as my dad also had a nightmare the same night and told me to go ask him about it. When I asked Pops about his dream, he told me that he was dreaming about a guy who broke into the house, made his way into my sister's room, and ended up killing her. This woke him out of his sleep, and when he looked out the hallway into the kitchen, he said he actually saw someone leave my sister's room. The two rooms are right beside each other that lead into the hall that leads into the kitchen, and walk into the kitchen. He said he got up and ran to the kitchen, and when he flipped the light on, no one was there. It was then that I told him that I always see someone standing in the doorway every night, and he just told me it was the furnace. What the hell? After I turned 18, I was still seeing this guy. My friends would spend the night, and in the morning, they would explain to me how they saw a guy standing in the middle of the room, thinking it was me, and then explain what he looked like. That was when activity in the house started to pick up. My family and I would constantly see things out of the corner of our eyes. My mother one night told me about a floating person with a tiny smile on their face, waving to her. Loud, unexplained noises followed up by things. One night, it was all of our empty bottles lined up on our freezer, which I thought was hella cool, moving unexplained. I feel like I might be dragging this on, and I have a bit more to talk about, so I think I will make a part 2 about my experiences in the future. Looking back to them, I think things only get worse for me. Nightmares with ghosts and demons. And we ended up getting the house blessed. But like I said, that will be another story. Thanks for listening and reading my story. Indonesian Black Magic. I was reading another story here about black magic, which reminds me of an incident that occurred almost 20 years ago. It's probably not as scary as other stories on here, but it's definitely odd. My family immigrated to Canada when I was 9. Years later, I was living with my mom, brother, grandma, cousin, and an Indonesian houseworker. My maternal relatives are all Chinese Indonesians. At that time, my mom was too busy to take care of us, so our aunt found a houseworker, cleaner, caretaker from Indonesia to help around. I can't remember her name. We always changed houseworkers, but let's call her Mia. She's quite an easygoing person. I was probably the only one who casually talked and joked with her the most, regardless of our status. One day, when I returned home from school, I didn't see Mia. She was usually in the kitchen or somewhere on the first floor at this hour, so I asked my grandma about it. She told me Mia was in the basement, resting in her room. Then she said, in the early afternoon, Mia suddenly came up from the basement, crying uncontrollably and trying to hug my grandma for comfort. Her hair was cut short, like really short to the point some parts of her scalp were almost exposed. It was not nicely cut either, as if someone had randomly snipped her hair strand by strand. She looked like a mess. I remember my grandma saying that Mia got snipped hair all over my grandma's clothes when Mia was hugging her. A while later, Mia calmed down and went back down to the basement for a sleep. I should know that my grandma doesn't speak Indonesian or English, so she couldn't communicate or ask what was going on. One thing for sure is, no one else was in the house except Mia and my grandma. For the next few days, Mia still cleaned around the house, but she looked really down and emotionless. I was a bit scared to talk to her. My cousin bought her a wig, and that was what she wore every day. No one else told me what really happened that day. Slowly, things went back to normal, and Mia was also returning to her usual self. I forgot how the conversation started, but she opened up the details to me about that weird incident. She was just resting in her room, and then the next thing she remembered was her hair was cut short, and her hair was everywhere. To her surprise, she was the one holding the scissors. By the time she realized it, she broke down and rushed upstairs. The rest was what my grandma told me. Then she was telling me about her life back in Indonesia. She had a boyfriend back home and had often dreamed about him, always telling her to come back to Indonesia. Her parents hate him though, and instead wanted her to marry another rich man. She doesn't like him at all, which was why she left home to work in Canada, so she could avoid him. She suspected that man probably hired someone to cast a spell on her and made her cut her own hair as a punishment for running away from him. At that time, I didn't know much about black magic or voodoo. Actually, even now I still don't know much about it. I just had an idea that it's something similar to cursing someone and causing them to have bad luck. Weeks after the incident, my mom said Mia had returned to Indonesia. I asked her why. All she said was because her contact terms had ended with us, although I really didn't believe that. My mom was probably afraid more unusual events might somehow get us all involved. Thanks for reading.